Hello guys, my name is Victor Bloodstone. Today I will be telling you guys about 5 true and disturbing paranormal incidents happened on Friday the 13th. So, let's get started. Incident 1. The haunting of Hollow Cottage. Friday the 13th had always been a day of superstition for me, a day when the veil between our world and the supernatural seemed to thin. But little did I know that on one such fateful Friday, I would experience a paranormal incident that would haunt me for the rest of my life. It was a chilly evening, and I was on my way to a friend's birthday party in the countryside. The party was set to take place at a remote cottage nestled in the woods. The drive there was uneventful, but as I approached Hollow Cottage, an overwhelming sense of foreboding settled over me. The cottage was old, its wooden tilde section 8 weathered by time. The party was in full swing when I arrived, but the laughter and music felt strangely hollow against the backdrop of this eerie place. I couldn't help but notice the portraits on the walls, their eyes following my every move. As the night wore on, the atmosphere grew increasingly charged. I overheard whispers about the cottage being haunted, and my curiosity got the better of me. I decided to explore its nooks and crannies, determined to unravel its secrets. I climbed the creaky stairs to the second floor, where I discovered a locked door at the end of a dimly lit hallway. I was drawn to it, as if an unseen force was compelling me to enter. I managed to find an old, rusted key in a forgotten drawer and, with trembling hands, unlocked the door. The room beyond was shrouded in darkness, and the air was frigid. I cautiously stepped inside, and that's when I heard a mournful, disembodied wail that sent shivers down my spine. The room was adorned with faded photographs and antique furniture, as if it had been untouched for decades. In the corner, I saw a rocking chair swaying back and forth, seemingly of its own accord. The temperature continued to drop, and I could see my breath in the air. I knew then that I was not alone in that room. A presence manifested before me, a shadowy figure with hollow eyes and a disfigured face. It reached out toward me, and I could feel an intense, bone-chilling cold that seemed to pierce my very soul. In a panic, I fled the room and locked the door behind me. The party continued as if nothing had happened, but I was changed. The sinister encounter had left a mark on me that I couldn't shake. I tried to warn the other guests about the haunted room, but they laughed it off as superstition. To this day, I carry the memory of that paranormal encounter with me. I have never set foot in Hollow Cottage again, and the image of that shadowy figure haunts my nightmares. It serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes, on Friday the 13th, the supernatural forces that hide in the shadows can make themselves known in the most terrifying ways. Incident 2. The Cursed Painting. On a particularly stormy Friday the 13th, I found myself at an estate sale in a quaint little town. It was a curious place filled with antique oddities, but one item, in particular, caught my attention: an old, weathered painting of a somber woman in a dilapidated frame. The painting exuded an aura of melancholy, and I felt an inexplicable connection to it. Despite the unsettling feeling it gave me, I couldn't resist buying it and taking it home. I hung the painting in my living room, and that's when the strange occurrences began. The woman in the painting seemed to watch me with mournful eyes, her expression shifting from sadness to anger. I was plagued by vivid nightmares of her, dreams filled with despair and torment. As the days passed, I noticed that the room grew unnaturally cold whenever I entered. Objects moved on their own, and whispers echoed through the walls. The woman's face in the painting contorted with a sinister grin, and I could swear I heard her voice in the dead of night, whispering dark secrets into my ears. Desperation drove me to research the painting's origins, and that's when I discovered its dreadful history. It was said to be the portrait of a woman who had gone mad, accused of witchcraft and burned at the stake. Her spirit was believed to be trapped within the painting, cursed to torment anyone who possessed it. I knew then that I had to rid myself of the cursed painting. I tried to burn it, but the flames would not consume it. I attempted to bury it, but it reappeared in my home, hung on the wall as if mocking my efforts. In a final act of desperation, I reached out to a paranormal expert, who conducted a seance to release the tormented spirit from the painting. As the seance reached its climax, the room filled with an oppressive presence, and the painting shattered into pieces. The woman's spirit was freed, and I felt an overwhelming sense of relief as the room warmed. and the whispers ceased. But the experience left me with a deep sense of dread, a reminder that on Friday the 13th, even seemingly harmless objects can hold sinister secrets. Incident 3. The Accursed Wedding. Friday the 13th had always been a day shrouded in superstition, a day when irrational fears bubbled to the surface. I never paid much heed to such beliefs until that fateful Friday when I attended my cousin Sarah's wedding, an event that would forever change my perception of the paranormal. The wedding was a grand affair, held in a centuries-old mansion nestled in a remote part of the countryside. The mansion itself was a breathtaking relic of the past, its ornate architecture and sprawling gardens evoking a sense of timeless elegance. The day was perfect, with the sun shining brightly and the sky a brilliant blue. The ceremony proceeded without a hitch, and Sarah was radiant in her wedding gown. As the evening descended and the reception began, the mansion's grand ballroom came alive with music and laughter. It was during the wedding toasts that a distant thunderstorm began to roll in, casting a shadow over the celebration. The atmosphere in the ballroom grew tense, and it wasn't long before the lights flickered and dimmed. The room was plunged into darkness, and a collective gasp rippled through the guests. In the eerie silence that followed, a mournful, otherworldly sound filled the air. It was a haunting, disembodied whisper, a voice that seemed to come from all directions and none. The whispers were incomprehensible, the words a spectral murmur that sent shivers down my spine. The lights flickered back to life, and the room seemed to return to normal, but a sense of unease lingered. The guests exchanged nervous glances, but Sarah and her groom, John, were undeterred. The festivities continued, but the spectral whispers became a disconcerting backdrop to the evening. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. I discreetly inquired about the mansion's history and discovered that it had once been the site of a tragedy. Decades ago, a wedding had taken place at the same mansion on a Friday the 13th. The bride had died mysteriously during the ceremony, her cause of death never fully explained. The revelation sent a chill down my spine, and I felt compelled to investigate further. I slipped away from the reception and ventured to the mansion's library, a place that exuded a sense of age and wisdom. The room was dimly lit, with heavy drapes that concealed the outside world. As I examined the old tomes that lined the shelves, I came across a dusty journal from the 1920s, a journal that belonged to the groom from the ill-fated wedding. The journal was filled with cryptic entries, each one more unsettling than the last. The groom wrote of strange occurrences leading up to the wedding, of eerie whispers and phantom footsteps in the mansion's corridors. The journal culminated in a chilling entry from the wedding day itself. The groom described the sudden darkness that had enveloped the ceremony, the same ghostly whispers that had echoed through the mansion, and the bride's inexplicable death. My heart raced as I read the words, and I couldn't help but feel a connection between the events of the past and the eerie incidents of that evening. It was as if the tragic energy of that long-ago wedding had returned to haunt Sarah's own nuptials. I rushed back to the reception, determined to share my discovery, but as I re-entered the ballroom, I froze in my tracks. Sarah stood at the center of the dance floor, her expression vacant. John was beside her, his eyes filled with terror. The guests had formed a circle around them, their faces twisted with anguish. The room was once again plunged into darkness, and the spectral whispers grew louder, their words a mournful lament. Sarah's wedding gown seemed to move of its own accord, as if guided by an unseen force. The guests watched in horror as Sarah was pulled into the center of the circle. In a moment of heart-stopping dread, I realized that history was repeating itself. The whispers grew more intense, and the room filled with an icy chill. Sarah's voice joined the spectral chorus, her words a cryptic lament. As the darkness lifted, Sarah stood alone, her wedding gown tattered and her face etched with sorrow. The guests were in a state of shock, unable to comprehend what they had witnessed. The room, once filled with celebration, had transformed into a place of haunting silence. The paranormal events of that Friday the 13th would remain etched in my memory, a chilling reminder that sometimes, the past can cast a long shadow over the present, and the superstitions of old may hold more truth than we dare to admit. Incident 4, The Haunting of Fairview Manor. I've always been a skeptic when it comes to the supernatural, But an incident that occurred on a particularly ominous Friday the 13th changed my perspective forever. I was visiting my grandparents in their centuries-old mansion, Fairview Manor, a place that exuded history and mystery. On that night, the wind howled through the ancient trees, and the full moon cast airy shadows upon the manor. My grandmother, a stern yet kind woman, always had a penchant for recounting tales of restless spirits and unexplained phenomena that had plagued the manor for generations, but I had always dismissed these stories as mere folklore. As I lay in my childhood bedroom, I heard the creaking of the floorboards in the hallway, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. I dismissed it as the old house settling, but then came the whispering, faint at first. The voices seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. I tiptoed to the hallway, convinced that my grandparents were having a late-night conversation, but the voices grew louder and more distinct as I approached their closed bedroom door. It was not my grandparents. The voices were foreign, their language incomprehensible. As I strained to listen, the door swung open, revealing an empty room. The voices ceased, and the air grew icy. A pervasive feeling of dread washed over me as I realized I was alone in the hallway. I returned to my room, shaken, and attempted to sleep, but sleep eluded me. The whispering voices persisted, filling the room with their unintelligible language. They seemed to be coming from behind the wall, a wall that had always concealed a hidden chamber. Driven by curiosity, I began to inspect the wall, tapping it with my fingers and listening for hollow sounds. As if responding to my touch, a section of the wall slid away, revealing a hidden room bathed in an eerie, otherworldly light. The room was filled with antique objects, dusty books, and a portrait of a family I did not recognize. I felt a presence in the room, and my gaze was drawn to a woman in the portrait, her eyes following my every movement. Her expression was one of sorrow and longing. I couldn't resist investigating further, my skepticism overridden by the enigma of the hidden room. As I touched an old mirror, my reflection began to distort, and the room seemed to shift around me. I was transported into a vision of the past, a scene of a grand, opulent party. The woman from the portrait appeared, as real as any living person, and she spoke to me. Her name was Eliza, and she had lived in Fairview Manor in the 19th century. She told me of her tragic life, her love for a man from a lower social class, and her confinement to the hidden chamber by her disapproving family. Eliza's tale was one of sorrow and injustice, and I was overwhelmed by the depth of her emotions. She implored me to help her find peace, to reveal her story to the world. The vision ended, and I found myself back in the hidden room, the portrait of Eliza weeping. I shared the story with my grandparents, and to my surprise, my grandmother's eyes welled with tears. She revealed that Eliza's tale had been a family secret, a tragic history that had been concealed for generations. On that Friday the 13th, Eliza's story became known, and the whispers that had haunted Fairview Manor ceased. I left the manor with a newfound belief in the paranormal and a sense of fulfillment, knowing that I had helped a restless spirit find the peace she had long sought. Incident 5. The Phantom Radio. Friday the 13th had always held an air of superstition, but I had never truly believed in the paranormal until an eerie encounter with a phantom radio that left me questioning the boundaries of our world. I was on a cross-country road trip, traveling alone on a desolate stretch of highway, when I spotted a long-abandoned motel. The sign read Harrison's Haven, and the building stood like a relic of a bygone era. Intrigued, I decided to stop for the night. The motel was decrepit, its rooms covered in dust and cobwebs. I selected a room at the end of a dimly lit corridor and settled in for the night, convinced that I was the only living soul in the place. As I lay in bed, I heard faint music in the distance, a melody that seemed to emanate from an old radio. The sound was eerie, like a nostalgic tune from the 1940s. I assumed it was a distant car radio or a figment of my imagination. The music persisted, growing louder and more distinct as if it were coming from within the room. I searched the room for the source of the sound, but there was no radio to be found. The volume of the music rose to a crescendo, filling the room with its haunting melody. In a state of perplexity, I returned to bed, unable to explain the source of the phantom radio. The music seemed to envelop me, and the room grew colder. The eerie sensation of not being alone intensified. Suddenly, the air was filled with voices, faint whispers that seemed to carry stories of longing and despair. I listened intently, unable to make out the words but sensing the emotions they conveyed. A presence appeared in the room, a figure bathed in an ethereal light. It was a woman in a vintage dress, her hair pinned up in an old-fashioned style. She held a radio, the source of the haunting music and voices. The woman's eyes met mine, and she spoke. Her name was Eleanor, and she had lived in the motel in the 1940s. She had been a singer, her voice captivating audiences in the motel's lounge. But tragedy had struck when she disappeared without a trace, and her voice was lost to the world. Eleanor's story was one of mystery and unfinished business. She implored me to help her, to find her lost recordings hidden in the motel, recordings that would allow her voice to be heard once more. Driven by a newfound belief in the supernatural, I embarked on a search for the lost recordings. It took me to the motel's basement, a place filled with discarded belongings from years past. There, in a forgotten corner, I discovered a box of dusty reel-to-reel tapes. As I played the tapes, Eleanor's voice filled the room, her musical haunting and melancholic melody. The recordings were a testament to her talent and a tribute to the life she had lost. On that Friday the 13th, I helped Eleanor's voice find its way to the world, and the phantom radio ceased its series transmissions. I left Harrison's Haven with a newfound appreciation for the paranormal, knowing that sometimes, the mysteries of the past can bridge the gap between our world and the other side. If you liked the stories, then consider liking the video and subscribing my channel, as it would motivate me to make more videos for you guys. And thank you for watching this video.